So, getting out of our seat and out of our comfort zone. Years ago, I would tell like my team members, you know, get out of your seat, get off of your floor, pick up your phone, go see Sally, go sit with her for a day, go watch what she's doing, go and understand what her plight is. This may not even be Sally's request. Maybe it's because somebody else is asking her for something she just doesn't know. But sometimes that's a little uncomfortable. And especially since COVID and everybody's remote, we're all behind a screen every day. And it's even more important that we try to lean into the gray versus the black and white and understand like what's really going on and what's presented the pain that we can present a solution for. But I think trying to drive that clarity out of the fray and the chaos is really, I think that's key for us today more than ever.
Tell me about your career, how you got started, how it's evolved. I want to hear the Shawnna story.
Very non-traditional, that's for sure. So I never anticipated getting into tech. Whenever I started my career out of school, I thought I wanted to be in HR. And thankfully, I was in South Central Texas. I went to work for a company that was a pioneer in their space, a 50-year-old family-owned, vertically integrated business. And I was given the autonomy to go and work in almost every area of that organization. And because they were vertically integrated, that meant everything in supply chain, everything in sales operations. But I'm a fixer just by nature of who I am. I've been that way from as long as I can remember. It's just inherent to my core. And so the first thing that I saw was this amazing, very sweet, very kind receptionist who would sit there, and the mail was delivered twice a day, the US Postal Service mail, that is. And she would sit there with her letter opener and she would open up these 3 or 4 part purchase orders that would range between $500,000 to $50 million in value. And she had 3 wire baskets because we had 3 salespeople. And she would divide them up between telecommunications, oil and gas, or miscellaneous, call it what we would call now like emerging market, new business, not unclaimed customer kind of thing. And then twice a day, the salesman would come up and they would grab anything that was in their basket. And then they would go back and they would call the customer, say that they got it, they'd send it out to the shop floor. All that said, I knew about EDI. It was very new then. I'll date myself quickly and tell you this is 30 some odd years ago. But I was like, hey, I went to the son who was the EVP and I said, this is an opportunity where we could really shorten our sales cycle and the cycle by which we get orders to the floor. We can also we can extend it beyond that. We can start sending our raw material orders to Samuel Specialty Metals and Reynolds and all of these companies. And ultimately, we could squeeze all of that by at least 12 weeks, and which was huge for us. And he thankfully was going through his MBA program at the University of Texas. And so he's like, oh, this seems like a great case study. Why don't you just kind of also, while you're doing that, like write my work for me kind of deal, which was great. I loved it. So anyway, so my first kind of like foot in the water, toe in the water, whatever, head first into the shallow end was implementing EDI for a family-owned company. And then from there, there came the internet and email and all of these things that were just kind of opened the floodgates for them to, well, they were in a spiral downward when competition was really heating up and everyone was implementing these processes and outsourcing business to Mexico and to China. And it really kept them afloat for a number of years thereafter. And then it just kind of kept going from there. And I realized, especially, it was kind of the light bulb moment for me 3 companies later when I was at Toyota Manufacturing and implementing Toyota production systems, that Toyota way predated where I hear now where people talk about, and Elon says, well, Tesla's not an automotive company, it's a technology company. Toyota's been a technology company since their inception. They focus on everything being Kaizen and production systems that enable people to be faster and smarter and more scalable and repetitive. I mean, that is truly what TPS is. And so when we launched the Texas plant, I didn't even know what my job was, by the way, when I started there. I just accepted the job because I was so excited in a construction trailer because the plant was literally just a caliche lot. But I took my job and I was really, excited about it. And our mother plant was in Indiana, and our job was to build an independent plant and an independent TPS system, and TMS system in Texas. And that was like if we do a really good job with this, it limits the overtime call, it improves our yield, it really drives the number of vehicles that we get through the line. And I mean, it was that whole like, okay, I love this. Like this help, I can change the satisfaction and the quality of life for a person, not just the quality of product that we roll off, by having really efficient systems. And so that was like, okay, this is my niche. And so it took, you know, 12 years for me to click into realizing like where my value was, but I'd kind of been doing it all the while.
That's interesting because one of the things it took me a long time till I figured out what my superpower is, right? The thing I'm really uniquely, really good at. And it took me a while too. It's interesting. When I was CIO at Headwaters, I was in charge of M&A and a whole bunch of other things too. And we wanted to get a global fork truck contract. So I visited the Toyota fork truck plant in just south of Indianapolis, and it was
Yeah.
one of the interesting.
Princeton, Indiana. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
They
just
built the Tundra. Yeah.
yeah, it was fascinating to see it in practice. I'd learned a
Hmm.
lot about and studied a lot. And before I was an IT weenie, I was a lean manufacturing weenie. And I tell people all the time, the plant had about 1,000 employees, had about 1,000 employees for 20 years, and each employee was supposed to come up with 2 process improvement suggestions per month. So I did the math. 1,000 people, two a month, 20 years, that's about 240,000 improvement ideas. So I talked to the plant manager. I said, come on, after 250,000, the ones you get today got to be tiny compared to the ones you got the first 5 years. He said, oh, it's just the opposite. He said, it's like the one from last year created an opportunity for a breakthrough that we had this year. Anyway, it's just a great lesson learned. Anyway, sorry, this is about me.
It's incredible. No, it's incredible. Like I thought the same thing. I was like, I mean, they must get really diluted over time. I was, I mean, mind blown. So the whole Genshin Genbutsu principle of go and see. I mean, if you are a fresher coming right out of university in Japan, that literally means you stand by pillar one and you watch a process for 10, 12, 14 hours and you are just note taking about that process. We're not quite that disciplined in the US, where we'll watch a process, we'll note take, we come and we go. But it really means just standing there and watching to the point that something becomes so obvious. And I remember there was a young man who was a brand new engineer, he'd never had any role except had gone to school. So he was a collegiate, no work experience, 22-year-old graduate, by the way, from the University of, I think he came out of, oh, I'm going to mess it up. I never remember if it's University of Michigan, Michigan State, doesn't matter. But this kid watched that whenever they were putting the final torque on the lugs, that every time that there was a second team member who would hold tight the actual tire so that the wheel didn't give final spin, because it gives about a 5-degree spin on final torque. And all he did was go to the lab. He just went to the R&D lab and he got 2 pieces of 2x4 and he put them together and he used a jig and crossed them and he just made a cross out of it. So that all they did was every time they would just pop it on there. And so it held it instead of a team member holding it. That ended up being implemented across every Toyota facility. And he ended up being the Kaizen winner of the year. All he did was see something that everybody else had seen every day in every facility for years, for decades. But he saw something. And so you think that, oh, well, yeah, I mean, how many bright ideas can you really see? And all it takes is just a fresh set of eyes to go, oh, why does it take somebody over there? And he heard it. It was actually the audible call whenever they actually call for the second team member. He heard that person call for someone and he went, What are they looking for somebody for? And that was all it took. And so I think that's where, we tend to overcomplicate things. And that's why you brought up, you said the word superpower. And a lot of times I'll say that my superpower is like in listening and communication, because I I talk a lot. I love to talk. I love to just ideate and communicate, but I really love to listen like between the lines. And it's what, especially for technologists, I think we tend to take the literal and not always ask the in between, the gray question. We hear the need that comes from the business, and it's like, well, Sally literally is asking for a new payroll report, when what Sally needs is actually new data. And maybe there's a way that she actually can learn to fish if we go and talk to Sally. So, getting out of our seat and out of our comfort zone. Years ago, I would tell like my team members, you know, get out of your seat, get off of your floor, pick up your phone, go see Sally, go sit with her for a day, go watch what she's doing, go and understand what her plight is. This may not even be Sally's request. Maybe it's because somebody else is asking her for something she just doesn't know. But sometimes that's a little uncomfortable. And especially since COVID and everybody's remote, we're all behind a screen every day. And it's even more important that we try to lean into the gray versus the black and white and understand like what's really going on, and what's presented, the pain that we can present a solution for. um, but I think trying to drive that clarity out of the fray and the chaos is really, I mean, I think that's key for us today more than ever.
That is such a great point. I tell people, those of us in technical roles should go, I call them days in the life, after the old Beatles song. Go work in a retail store. Go work in sales operations. Just go work in a distribution center, because we get context for what their life is like, and we make much better decisions when we have context for what their life is like. So anyway, that's a great point. So we kind of got off track there
That's
because,
all right.
it's fine. You started out in a non-IT or technology role, and you ended up leading large, significant technology departments.
Hmm.
So how did you make that transition where, hey, I can't imagine, Shawnna, that somewhere along the way you decided to learn how to write, let's say Java or JS or Node.js, or learn how to do storage administration.
Hmm.
So how did you make that transition so that you are not only comfortable, but successful at leading technology teams?
Yes, I jokingly say that, I can knock out a heck of a web page, and you don't want me to touch much else, other than that. And I'm a master of Excel and pivot tables. And, back in the day, there were a whole bunch of great databases that I could do, but I was whiz bang at all of that. And since then, I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. So I think one of the things that I pride myself on is asking questions that help me to stay very knowledgeable about the systems that exist within the organizations that I work, to understand the workflows and the inner workings of them, so that when things go off the rails, because inevitably they will, there's nothing more frustrating from an operator, an engineer, a developer standpoint than having to answer questions to someone who doesn't understand their plight. Like that is exhausting. So I never want to be that leader who's asking questions like, well, why did it break? And well, how did that happen? Well, you're not going to, I mean, when you're met with, well, you're not going to understand me anyway, but I have to explain it to you. I don't ever want to be in that dynamic. And so I try to stay very engaged and very understanding of how does the system work? What does it touch? What are all of the inner workings? What are all of the breakpoints? So that we can have an intelligent conversation around how we're going to get it back on track. But to your point, do I know how to write lines of code in every one of those systems? Absolutely not. I mean, whenever I was the CIO at VisionWorks and VSP, we were still running on an AS400 for a number of our back office systems. I can look at a green screen and I can know what everything is. I know what all the data is, and I know what that system is. I'm not about to go touching a line of COBOL. There's just not a snowball's chance, for good reason. But again, I mean, that's where you build trust with people, to ask the right questions, to pay attention to the right things, and invest the time to actually sit and make it meaningful. Explain to me why our inventory accounting system talks to our WMS. Explain why our financial systems talk to our HRIS whenever you're working in a retail environment. Explain to me why our POS talks to our HRS, and really digging in, at the appropriate level to be intellectual in conversation, but not bothersome or so far into the weeds, that your team feels as though you're also challenging their level of intellect. You have to build that trust factor. But I do believe that it's really important that people understand. If somebody looks at you and says, now what is PeopleSoft again? Well, there's probably a problem. If somebody says, Manhattan, is that a city? So I mean, there are things that as leaders, it's really key for us to know and to understand. And it's not just because of the size of spend that's associated with those systems, it's the magnitude and the impact to the business. One, for the one-to-one relationship that we have with those vendor partners, but two, the criticality when we talk about business continuity. I mean, there's a huge piece of that. And I do think that since COVID, we've also had a gap and a lapse of our sensitivity around what we do with business continuity planning. And then separate from that, but a likeness, is disaster recovery. The way that we manage and maintain DR plans and DR strategies has also had some deficiency. And so not understanding our tech stack is a gap and a vulnerability that, to your point around how do we as leaders keep keen and really honed in on that, and that's where I think we just have to. It's a sensitivity that we have to address and be really responsible about.
Yeah, one of the ways I describe it is just like you don't expect your CFO to be making journal entries. I expect my CIO to be a business leader who understands technology.
That's right.
And so, what does it take for me to understand technology? That's going to depend on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But my goal has been, I will understand enough that I can help when needed.
That's right.
Not hands on keyboards, but like you said, something just broke. Okay, well, let's talk about what changed. You know what I mean? Just helping, being able to provide some support, even if the support is I was once on a Zoom call. We'd had an issue with one of our cloud providers, and so one of our systems was down, and so the poor cloud orchestration engineer, he's on a Zoom call with 43 people watching him type. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, my contribution to the cause is everybody,
yes,
turn off Zoom. Let Rashid work on this and let us know what he finds.
I've done the same thing, Neil. I mean, it's good to have the 2 a.m. bridge rally when something is broken. I want somebody to feel supported. What I don't want them to feel like is that they are literally sitting under a microscope.
Yeah, exactly.
On that point, though, what I will say about going back to the level of technical detail and understanding, those 2 a.m. bridge calls, I've had the resolution come from the least likely source.
Yeah.
As well. So, I mean, it is important that you allow for that rally cry of having people on there. I had, and he's a wonderful human I absolutely adore, but I'll never forget it. He's an enterprise architect. He actually is one of the most brilliant people that I've had the privilege to work with. But he said, one of the things, Shawnna, is, that's great about enterprise architecture. I said, what's that? And he said, never a crisis or a sub one in architecture. And I said, just don't always assume that, because we have a bridge call, you might be the guy who's on it. And he always was. He would always join, and not that we had a ton of those, but when we had an issue or we had a system that needed attention after hours, because I mean, we did legacy store polling after hours for 750 stores, things would go off, offline from time to time. And inevitably, he would be one of the smart guys who's sitting over there, kind of behind the scenes, taking a look at some stuff, and go, well, hey, have you guys looked at this, or have you thought about this? Because sometimes when we're in the weeds of it and something is broken, it's really hard to step back and see it. And so you need those people who it isn't even their day job. He's not a coder or a developer, but he could see the workflow, he could see the end to end, and he could give guidance and advisement. Those are the other people that you want to have, as your key resources and your support structure. So, just speaking to that level of technical, influence, I think it's really helpful.
All right, so we talked about how you sort of got to where you are, your superpower. How has the technology leader role changed during your career, or has it?
I actually think it's changed a lot. I think that I've mentioned COVID a couple of times. I'm wondering when we're going to stop talking about COVID, um, but at the same time, it did shift a lot of things for us. I mean, one, there's no longer a norm. I still hear people saying, "Well, we're talking about returning back to our norm of work." And we're talking about like going on 5 years. Like, what are we doing? We're still talking about like return to work. I mean, it's funny. Um, I don't know that we ever will resume a norm of, or that our, next gen know what Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, 40-hour work week even really is, because there's so many variables: remote, hybrid, contract, part-time, full-time, but, influencer, whatever has changed all of that. But so I think that aside from that, the role itself has shifted large and in part because of AI. It started to shift because of machine learning and the influence of RPA. Then it further shifted with the introduction and the aggressive introduction of more more deep-seated deterministic models and workflows that were coming with AI. Now we have agentic technology that is really moving the needle. So I think where you see that intersect of a traditional CIO, um, leading all of the kind of pieces and parts that you normally would, and you see the chief product officer, I think you're seeing a greater intersect of those two positions, because the level of influence is so weighted. It's almost like one can't exist without the other. They've become synonymous, so why not just bring them together? Now, the interesting dynamic of that is there's not a bench of people who have worn that common hat. It's a struggle to find someone who throughout their career has been an engineer and has done the actual product development work and has led technology and big transformation. So we're at this kind of this interesting inflection point of who do we want to kind of wear that hat. And I think there's a part of that, that's why we're seeing a lot of consultancy and advisement and fractional that are coming in and trying to help to navigate it, because I think a lot of companies are hitting this existential crisis of what should this role look like. And having said that, I think that there are a lot of leaders who are also facing that crisis of, I really need to be wearing multiple hats. And like I mentioned at the top of our call, some of that for me, in leading, most recently in leading a SaaS-based AI company, is less about the product and it's more about the product growth and strategy, while changing the tires on the bus. I mean, as we're flying down the highway, because there's all of the infrastructure, there's all of the cloud migration, there's everything, there's all of the security around GPU and reservation of GPU that everybody's fighting the same fight for. So it's how do we do that while allowing for all of that product innovation to occur. And so it's just a different time. And so, yes, I think the role has certainly shifted. I think that the boundaries of leadership have shifted, amongst the C-suite executives, and even at the senior director and VP level. I think that a lot of those roles have changed. Um, Operationally speaking, I think with the introduction of AI, where there doesn't have to be so much hands-on, there's a lot of AI orchestration that can occur. So you don't need a leader in every area of AI ops or of IT ops. And so I think that that's certainly, been really key. And then I think that where in the past, especially, if you think about tech leaders that were always seen as kind of operators, the keep the lights on, now it is more of a strategic leader and architect. I mean, we're shaping business models and customer experience and associate experience and really driving the competitive advantage. That's whenever I think about like my role. And so it's not just supporting the business, it's really either creating or co-creating the business. So, I think the next gen or even current gen, but next gen most certainly, they have to be leaders that can connect innovation to the outcome. And that's where that really bringing clarity to all of the chaos and the complexity. And then where organizations have been saying for a couple of years, we need to be data driven decision makers. That's where these technology leaders from a CIO level perspective really have to bring data to decisions. And I think that expectation is really about being culture leaders and change agents and influencers, because you can't expect an organizational shift for technology advancement without having the human side of it that has to come in with communication and trust and for people to get on board.
You bring up some really interesting points. One being that the role is being added. There's a need to add to what we've done in the past because you can't walk away from it. You still have to deliver operational excellence. You have
Uh-huh.
to deliver performance. You still have to modernize. You have to do all that stuff. But in addition, you have to all the things you've talked about. And then I think another challenge is given the rapid change in technology, how do you even get good at selecting technologies and provide, you know what I mean? Because there's so
Yeah,
many out there. And the last point that you really emphasized for me is, for me, the role, I had this recognition years ago after a complete and total failure as a CIO. I can make the greatest technology decisions in the world, but if I don't bring the people along, I will fail
that's right.
completely.
It's 100% right.
And it was a hard lesson to learn that when I think about it, I still kick myself for being such a bonehead that I didn't know going in.
I give a lot of that advice to Neil because I mean, even if it's just give people a chance to weigh in, like ask them their opinion. They will be so much more bought in to if I mean, everybody knows like we're going to have to make this big upgrade. We're going to have to rip and replace the system. I mean, it's going to be painful. Nobody's going to love this endeavor. Nobody's going to want to do it. But when you bring everybody together and you let them voice their concerns, you let them voice their pain, you let them give their suggestions, one, you have a great opportunity to learn something. So don't assume that you know everything going into it without having heard the voices. Two, you get to take some cheerleaders and champions along the way. Three, always bring the naysayers into the room too, because those are your antagonists who are going to be the ones who have the greatest potential to, throw darts into your hot air balloon. And if you get all of those people in the room, you start to get sponsorship when you're not around. So those, the people who are like, yeah, this has been painful for a while. You always want those cheerleaders, and they're the ones who are going to keep your project in the positive light when you're not available to do so for yourself. And then you start to give those other people who really just want a voice, they want to be heard and they want to be seen. You're bringing them in, and the noise is reduced because it's already been voiced. So it's really easy for people to want to talk and be snippy and snappy and have a lot of, quick things to say. And, you say it, at the water cooler, at the coffee pot, but, wherever it is now. But to do that, if you haven't at least opened it up to them, but if you give them the floor, you still will have some, but you have such a greater likelihood of one, taking a partner, getting some good lessons in the mix, but also having greater success of, that diminishing value of rumor, and negativity if you just take the time. And it is time. And I recognize that sometimes it's like, oh, I don't have time to go listen to Gary, well, you know what? Gary is going to suck more out of your time with your triage and your cleanup if you don't do it on the front end than if you just take that 30, 45 minutes and give Gary just the time he needs to vent. So that's my lesson as well. I've been down that road. So I totally agree with you.
Well, it kind of ties back to what you talked about with Toyota, where I'm going to go spend time with them, understand what they're doing. And the other thing that builds is a relationship of trust between you and them before you ever come to them and say, we need to blow up your life. Will
Yeah,
you come along with me? Because
that's
at
right.
least you got a relationship that you can
Yeah.
rely on.
Yeah. At
Hey,
VisionWorks and
go ahead.
VSP, we did a very large, I mean, year and a half long point of sale and electronic health records modernization. We had a homegrown point of sale that we had been operating against for years. We had gone through a couple of acquisitions. We had a lot that we knew we needed to modernize to be able to bring together, data visibility. We didn't have anything throughout the course of the day because we had nightly store polling, we had nightly clinical polling. We didn't have virtual appointment scheduling. There were a whole bunch of limiting factors. The doctors love their manila folder file rooms. And doctors, especially who have been in practice with the same set of patients in the same location for 20, 30 years and have 10 practices, do not want to be told that anything is going to change. Sally, who has been working the reception desk, knows everybody for 3 generations. She loves her practice. She loves, her 3 highlighters and her way of doing things. And the doctor says, as long as Sally's happy, I'm happy, and we're not changing a thing. We come in and say, technology is going to make everything so much better. That means to him, somebody like Big Brother is going to see what's happening there and is going to control things. That takes a lot of change management, and it takes a lot of coercing and conversation to get someone like a doctor to want to change and to understand why this is going to make his life and Sally's life better. Why is it going to make the lives of his patients? Because truth be told, that's what he cares about. He wants to know that he's going to be able to service his patients just as well as he always has on his time, on his schedule, at the rates that he has. It's not going to be that just because it's shiny and new, that it's going to cost more, like all of those things. But that takes exactly what you said. Leave your seat, go spend time in their clinic. A phone call's not going to get it. A phone call is going to get yelled at. But going and living a day in the life and understanding, like, wait a minute. And it can't just be a one shot and done either. Because what happens in a rural and remote area 30 miles west of Louisville, Kentucky, and what happens in the inner Galleria Mall of Dallas, Texas are two very different experiences. So you have to really like be in tune and in touch with the fact that one size does not fit all, and how you leverage your change management and your culture inflection has to also be different. That communication has to be also very tailored and very boutique, based on your audience.
So the roles changed. How do you think it changes going into the next few years? And then one thought to add to that. What could a tech leader do today to sort of start to future proof their career as all these changes happen?
Yeah, the first one I would say is organizations who have not already recognized that they're the leader of technology or of uh, of security, if that's not already integrated, if they have not already carved out that role at the executive, at the C-suite level, they're behind. That person needs to be at the CEO reporting level, or at least at the table. They have a tremendous amount of responsibility and influence over every touch point of a business. I've had one very one-off conversation where I agree that nesting that position a little lower in the organization probably still made sense, but that is the only one. I frankly, every other conversation that I've had, it's a necessity that they have visibility both from any kind of the risks that are occurring, whether the conversations are happening around M&A, the things that are being talked about from a human resources perspective. That goes all the way to hiring decisions that are being made. Are we going to open an office in a country that actually is now presenting security vulnerabilities? no disrespect to the leader of HR or the leader of finance. They mean well by Google searching things, but are they getting FBI and DoD bulletins every day? No, they're probably not.
That brings
So
up a
I
good
think that's
point.
really important.
I hate to interrupt, but that
I
brings
know.
up a good point. Do we sometimes, with how we approach those relationships, pigeonhole ourselves so that we're not the ones they think of that should be involved? Okay.
We do. And I think that's a legacy challenge of we wait for them to come to us
Yeah.
with an issue or a concern. And so if those leaders are still within an organization where they're nested a level down, they've got to fight for their seat and their voice. Because it's not a distraction or a disruptor, it's a necessity. And I think that especially as organizations have seen this shift, I mean, I think the last 2 and 3 years. This is probably the first time, at least in my career, aside from maybe the internet. Um, but this is the first time in my career where instead of us as leaders, especially technology leaders, where we're bringing technology into the organization saying, hey, look, this is what we're going to introduce. And I promise it's going to be better. And I know it's going to be a little uncomfortable and disruptive because it's new and you have to learn it. What we have now is we have an entire organization of people coming to IT, coming to HR, coming to ops saying, I want to use this. I use it at home. My life is better. Do you know that I use this on my phone? I use it on my Android. My kid uses this. And it's on the daily that they're wanting to introduce new tools, which equate to new risk into the environment. Well, I don't want to use Claude because I really like OpenAI. And we're like, whoa, Katie bar the door. Like, do you know what you're doing here? That's an unlicensed version. No, you can't use your own GitHub repository. No, you can't use an unlicensed version of OpenAI. But they don't mean harm. They want to work smarter. They want to work faster. And so we now have to accelerate our implementation, which equates to license costs. I mean, there are all of these different factors. So our roadmaps as leaders has completely gone out the window. So I think whenever you talk about like what's changing, there's a lot of things that are changing, but it's the agility that we have to institute into everything that we do. Where, there was a time where I could create a 1, 3, and 5 year roadmap. And aside from the COVID, throwing the wrench in that, I was pretty solid. I mean, kind of knew what we were doing. I had a budget set against it, knew I was capitalizing. Like, I mean, we had vendors who were lined up against India, all of it. We had partners engaged. I mean, it was pretty on, spot on. But now, I mean, what are we gonna bring to bear in 6 months? I mean, it could completely change what we want to do and pivot as an organization to remain competitive and competitive advantage, to be able to, maybe it becomes a limiting factor on availability, but there's a number of things that could sway us or persuade us to need, to make that change. So I think that's probably one of the most key things when we talk about like what's going to change. But going back to, to the question that you had, I think in order to stay or to get ready for those changes, I think there are several things that need to be done. I think that for if you look at technology leaders specifically, CIOs, CTOs, if they are 100% product, call them whatever you want. If it's a transformation officer, if somebody who's been very technology CIO focused, they need to get into the security space. The cyber defense and cybersecurity piece of it cannot rest solely on the shoulders of the CISO anymore. It that has that ship has sailed.
Well,
That
and it has to be,
person,
because it has to be baked into every
it
decision.
had absolutely, and it has to be on the front end. It can't be that you complete an endeavor and then send it over for security review. Those days are gone.
It goes
So
back to the whole lean principle. You build in quality, you don't search for it at the end.
that's exactly right. 100%. And so I think that is one aspect that has been a little bit delayed in adoption and attention. That, I was talking with an organization who, facilitates and hosts these, vendor speed dating events, for a day or what have you. And they do them independent. They have a security one, they have a marketing one, and they have a technology one. And I just told them, I said, I, why would I go whenever my needs are very much security and technology? I'm not going to give 2 days up. So I can send the CISO on my team, but that's two of us, 2 days. Like you're missing the mark. Like those days are not there anymore. I appreciate the carve out of marketing, but these don't really make sense to me. So I think that has to be a mind shift where it can be that you have a lockstep partnership with your CISO. And I'm not saying that that role doesn't exist. That role it absolutely does. You need a data privacy officer. You need a person who's responsible for governance and for audit and compliance. Like those people, their skill set exists. But to think that as a CIO or a CTO, that security is not your purview or responsibility because your CISO has got it all is a falsehood. So I think that that is one that if you want to stay really honed in on how this role is shifting, it has to be that you understand all of the ins and outs of cybersecurity and cyber defense. And that means the tools and technologies and also any of the peripheral requirements. So if you are a publicly traded company, what does that mean for you? And all of those things have to be, if you're a global, company, if you deal in automotive or you deal in healthcare, like you have to understand those. And that goes to, to your point around how much coding do you know and how much, I mean, this is the exact same requirement. You have to know based on your technology, based on your products, what are all of the requirements that go into being able to deliver that product in a sustained way, but also in a scalable way. And if you're going to hit a limiting, a blocker there because you're not going to be, SOX or SOC 2 or GDPR, then you better know that now. Otherwise, all of that 6 months of development to release, your next gen or your next version have, fallen by the wayside.
You're amazing. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's just fun. I
It's been
know.
great to get to know you the last few years. Any final words of
Um,
advice, of deep thinking?
I think, the biggest, we've hit on it several times, but I mean, I think it's just, the leadership piece of it. I think it's always, thinking about how you're just going to bring more clarity to the noise. Right now, everybody is running so hard and we're moving so fast. And sometimes it can be difficult to continue to build others up and to elevate them while you're bringing all of that clarity along. But that's where leadership is. It's a choice. It's not a should I. It's a I choose every day. Um, I think it's about building people and systems that outlast you whenever you've gone. And look, I mean, the tech's going to keep moving and growing and evolving, but I think it's and this is, some might challenge this, but I still believe that the real differentiator is the people who can really tie that strategy to humanity. So, you know, you can lead from wherever. If you're sitting at home and and you're working from home, but having that voice and that perspective, and I think that it's courageous to speak up and to make it known and to own it. And I think that that's where we, as again, as really smart leaders and leveraging our capabilities and our talents, have to constantly lean into that and think about how we're going to help others to kind of carry that forward, because we are, I mean, I see it every day, people running 100 miles an hour, and it's hard to stop and to think about how we're not just building those systems, but we're building the people who are going to sustain them.
Well, and I think another aspect to that is I think the role, technology leader, we've talked about it, we're adding more to it. I will exhaust myself and burn myself out unless I'm building an amazing team around me
Yeah.
that can share the load, carry it forward, like you said, and have the same attitude about serving our customers, whether they be internal or external.
And
So,
that's I've been so incredibly blessed to have built amazing teams. And I have several people who have worked with me now at different organizations. And they're just passionate people. They're not only brilliant in what they do, but they're passionate and they love a challenge and they love being able to lean in to make life better for our customers and our clients. And those are the people that you want to surround yourself with, because it's really good to have those people when times are great and everybody's, riding high and, the market's great and, things are fabulous. But those are the people you really want to have around you when things get bumpy.
yeah,
Because there's nothing that is more miserable than working around a group of folks who aren't passionate and
yeah,
aren't problem solvers and aren't critical thinkers when things are rough. So I believe that more than I can say, that really building your team when you're doing that and building it for the tough times as much as you're building them for the good times it's really important.
yeah. And building that relationship bank account that you can
Yes.
count on when things are
Yeah.
tough. That we've been
Yeah.
through. We're together. We're
Uh-huh.
not gonna we're not gonna complain. We're not gonna fight. We're not gonna blame. We're in this together. We'll figure it out
That's
because we
right.
work together well and we trust each other and we know we're good. Yeah,
Yeah.
not arrogance but confidence. I think.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's interesting. So I've done a couple of these now and the common theme is so far, and maybe it's just because I only pick people that I like, is what's the most important lesson you've learned? Build the team,
Yeah.
build the culture,
It's
build the
true.
team, build the culture, and life is just better all the way around. So
Yeah. I think everyone would probably agree. One of the most difficult times we had was when we all got turned on our head, at
yeah,
COVID, and everybody was send everybody home. We'll figure it out, and our executive team, because we had been acquired by private equity and we had a brilliant chairman of the board who brought together the dream team of a C-suite. And we had the most dynamic, challenge ridden conversations. We could have the healthiest conflict. And there wasn't a person within our 7,000 member organization who knew anything other than we were a well-oiled, tight team. And it's because truly we were. We could go from having a really tough conversation where, 6 out of 9 of us disagreed, right back into our group text message going, "Hey, good luck at tonight's baseball playoff game for so and so's son."
yeah,
Like that, because that's what high performing teams do. They know how to work together to resolve issues in high stress, high pressure situations that don't impact your relational dynamic.
right. And
And
you still care about each other.
you care. That's right, because we're all here for a common purpose. And if we didn't challenge one another, we wouldn't be making each other in this organization better. And we went through some rough times together. I mean, we lost an executive team member suddenly. I mean, but you know what? We were all there together, and those are the things. Those are the times that I really reflect back on. And as we've gone our separate ways, we we have this common denominator where we get back together and we talk, and that's the brilliance again of building really great teams. You see amazing successes. I mean, we were a Harvard white paper turnaround story because Murray Hennessy was smart enough to bring together a very diverse team. And it showed up over and over again. So
Well, thanks again, Shawnna. I've learned a lot.
thank you, Neil.
So I
I
really
appreciate
appreciate
it.
your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your travels, and I'll
I will.
see you next time.